Thank you, Laura, and greetings, everybody. Is my audio coming through?
Yep, you sound great.
That's great. And we are doing this in a little bit of a different way. And because of that, I've got a Superman cape behind me because I think all of you who have changed plans and come together to either help, like Laura and Ryan, or the audience, you've really done a terrific job of making sure we continue the tradition of the accessibility trends. This is the seventh edition. And what we do in this presentation every year is look at the year that has just gone by, try to make sense of what happened, try to identify trends that really make a difference to the digital accessibility world and share them with you. Get your thoughts, of course. So, what we usually do and what we will be doing today is we start usually by looking at the regulations and the litigation, what's happening in terms of that. And this year is no exception. We're going to do that. We look at users, what's happening in the world of technology and how it impacts users. Then we kind of focus in on the accessibility technology and look at what are the new things that are happening in the world of accessible technology, things that happen to make websites and mobile applications accessible, whether it's tools or other things. Then we do an annual survey of top 5 different, verticals, and we're going to be sharing the results of that survey. And we wrap it up by looking at what's coming. We don't have a crystal ball, but the challenge ahead, okay? So without further ado, this year, as I was thinking about, doing the entire regulations and litigation piece, I was thinking, this is an interesting year, right? I mean, we are looking at a CSUN presentation where I usually give a brief update on regulations. And this year, I was creating those slides and I realized I would be much better off at interpreting one thing, Domino's case, and then what it means in terms of what I call the repeat defendant problem, which is plaintiffs' lawyers repeatedly going back and suing the same websites or customers. And of course, anything else that you guys would think would be relevant. But this is what I thought was relevant, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on in the regulations and litigation section of the trends presentation today. I love the picture of all the Supreme Court judges sitting with all that pizza. Yum. All right, so what does the Domino's case really mean? I think everything I've read, everything that I've seen, people think of this as a major victory for people with disabilities and their advocates. But, legally, just thinking about it legally, it's not a big deal. But it is perceived as a big deal, and hence it's a big deal. The US Supreme Court did not change the law. The cert was denied. But the practical impact of this was that it settled law. It is the law now. I don't think anybody can debate that because they decided not to hear the case. There were many, many amicus briefs that were filed in support of Domino's petition, but they didn't really have any effect. And, what this means, in my perspective, is that the fact that the prevailing law remains status quo, that websites, what it translates to for all of us who are watching and trying to figure out what this means, is that websites must be accessible to screen readers and to other assistive technologies. The other thing about the Domino's case is that there was a lot of coverage in mainstream publications and websites and blog posts, both, well, from a technical perspective, like SD Times, business perspective, as in Forbes, legal, publications, marketing, all kinds of publications thought of this as a significant event. So businesses will have to now take into consideration the US Supreme Court decision as they look at the web and mobile accessibility risk. Okay. Domino's had received fair notice that its website and native mobile apps were, you know, must provide effective communication that facilitate full and equal enjoyment of Domino's goods and services to its customers who are people with disabilities. And our Constitution doesn't require that the Congress or the Department of Justice spell out exactly how Domino's should fulfill this obligation. So whether Domino's website and application are effective means of communication to people with disabilities is a fact-based inquiry within a court's competency, basically. Those of you who don't know Lainey Feingold, I don't know how many of you would not know her. She has been a lawyer with the most respected voice in, a lawyer who advocates for people with disabilities and digital equality. Her quote is, "Who but a lawyer would think a telephone was equal to an accessible website?" I found that really profound. So in the case of Domino's, the defendant's burden was to show that a phone number provided was effective communication to facilitate plaintiffs' full and equal enjoyment of Domino's products and services, and saying that Domino's must provide people with disabilities an equivalent or like experience. So is making a phone call the same? Can you do the same kind of customization of your pizza as you can online? I think it really is a critical point, okay? Because how can businesses force a person with a disability to use a single channel, whether it is to make a phone call or to provide like assistive technology that people with disabilities are not used to using, and have them use and learn a completely new technology, right? So alien to them and assistive technology that is alien to people with disabilities is not full and fair enjoyment, just like giving a phone number and expecting somebody to call is not full and fair enjoyment, which I thought was really interesting. So when you have a layer that you're trying to put on top of your website that has like a keyboard accessibility or things you can turn off and on, it means that a person with a disability has to turn off what they're using in order to use your layer of assistive technology, and that is not considered equal. So the other interesting thing is, it's very important to highlight this because until now, people were wondering whether native mobile apps are going to be, there was no precedence to this. But the US Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit this year in the Robles versus Domino's Pizza case became the first circuit to expressly extend Title III of the ADA, of the American Disabilities Act, to mobile applications. And, there's no way to, I guess what I'm really coming down to saying is now is the time for all companies to review their mobile apps and comply with the ADA and develop a remediation plan that will limit exposure to these lawsuits. Before Domino's, mobile claims were not common. And now I think it's going to become more and more the case. Because native apps are unlike web apps, they're software-based, companies, I think, for mobile apps, especially native mobile apps, have to start considering accessibility very early in the development phase. It's true of the web as well. But when you're talking about going back and retrofitting native mobile apps, it's just the same as web accessibility, right? But in this case, you have different platforms, iOS and Android, to consider. So it becomes even more important. My recommendation to everybody is practice agile accessibility systematically. Make sure you're shifting left, that you address for all digital accessibility requirements as early in the process as you can. When you're considering the budget, when you're considering the user stories, when you're considering the design, when you're doing your unit testing, I think it's got to be just built in. So the other question I ask myself, why are we seeing so many lawsuits, right? An accessibility lawsuit every hour in 2019 after the Domino's cert was denied. And of course, there are new state level requirements like California's Unruh Act, which is also going to have an impact. So what's more expensive than getting sued over accessibility or inaccessibility? Getting sued twice. Without an ongoing accessibility program, you plaintiffs can sue, or the same plaintiff can sue on new accessibility issues. And of course, this 40% number really depends on the industry. Retail is the one that is experiencing this really high repeat lawsuits. And there are probably three sources for the repeat accessibility lawsuits. Companies don't continue to internally enforce accessibility. We see a degradation. The initial emergency room visit, there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of cost and there's a lot of visibility in the initial lawsuit. And after it's over, people move on. And then companies that are reaching settlement agreements and getting into an ongoing dispute from the plaintiff's perspective over the fact that the defendants are not fixing accessibility issues in either the manner that is expected or the timeline that is expected, are being identified in settlement agreements. So apps and websites change content on a regular basis. Also, the infrastructure underlying them changes continuously. Fact of life. And so changes happen and new issues are discovered. So, and then I guess a plaintiff's lawyer, from their perspective, right? When they made a first claim, it's an easy thing to say, oh, let me go back and check that website and see if they're getting better or getting worse. So I think it's like, I really think that the way to do this is to maintain compliance. You have to implement it in the software development lifecycle. Change to the content and the infrastructure and technologies is inevitable. But there's another factor to this. A lot of people did not realize that websites are an aggregate of so much content and so much stuff that is coming from all over the place. If you don't push accessibility onto your vendors, this becomes a really huge issue, okay? When a third-party vendor is not giving you accessible content, it's going to be seen as your brand, your website. It's not going to be like, oh, this is coming from this vendor and this is coming from that vendor. It is your property, okay? So what you can do is make sure your vendors follow your accessibility rules. That your vendors are training their personnel, and your contracts with the vendor should include penalties if they deploy inaccessible content. So, they need to have some skin in the game as well, I think. And of course, as you're looking at new technologies, think about, as you're changing your tech stack, think about how accessibility, make it a requirement that you're evaluating the accessibility of new technologies. In the case of Hooters, the defendant was actively implementing the agreed to settlement. They had made a settlement, and second lawsuit was filed when they were working on the first lawsuit. The court said the initial lawsuit and settlement agreement didn't matter and allowed the second case to proceed. They were sued for different digital properties, okay? I think that's really important to keep in mind, that even if you're actively working on it, you have to have the process, ongoing, underlying things that you've done culturally across your organization to address accessibility. Otherwise, you're going to find other problems. So, lessons learned. I was thinking about that. With Domino's, the US Chamber of Commerce, for example, among other pro-business groups, offered theories in the amicus briefs that said the spike in litigation has not resulted in clear judicial guidance. The first is that the plaintiffs' firms have employed an aggressive sue and settle strategy. So what's happening is you've got all these lawyers that are, going around making deals, and it's like aggressively sending the same letter at many times, just changing the name of the recipient and sending them out, and then they're settling, right? And using this threat of the ADA stuff changing underfoot to force companies to forego protracted and expensive trials in favor of quick settlements, quick monetary payouts. And when I was looking back, I realized, I think there was a study that was done by UsableNet, more than 93% of website accessibility cases settled in 2018. And 55% of them actually settled within 60 days of filing. That's incredible. But this rinse and repeat pattern of settling these type of cases, you can still really, debate this, but the mootness issue, the Supreme Court stated that a request for injunctive relief will only be considered moot by a defendant's voluntary compliance with the law if the defendant meets the formidable burden of demonstrating that it's absolutely clear that the alleged wrongful behavior could not reasonably be expected to recur. Okay? Now, this is really interesting because there was a lawsuit, Diaz versus Kroger, and a legally blind plaintiff who used screen reading software to convert, text to speech, said that the Kroger company, the supermarket chain's website, violated the ADA. And the plaintiff actually relied on the Hooters case to argue that fixing the accessibility violations did not moot the lawsuit. That means you could file a second lawsuit. But the court, in the case of the Diaz case against Kroger, noted that the defendant company stated in an affidavit that it had remediated all the alleged ADA violations, ensured that no additional barriers to accessing the website existed, and it was committed to guaranteeing access going forward. So we had a webinar with Eve Hill a few months ago. We hosted that, and Eve said that $250,000 is not an undue burden for an accessibility program. That is crazy. So what can you do? Be the Kroger. Have an ongoing commitment, and I think this is the thing to do. But ultimately, the most difficult challenge businesses face in these cases is to disavow the court of the notion that a rigid standard of zero violations is appropriate. I think many of us in the accessibility industry agree that 100% compliance with WCAG success criteria, WCAG 2.1 or 2.0, level A, AA, on the entire website or mobile applications is not realistic 100% of the time, right? Things are changing all the time. We've talked about that. So for example, you know, you're adding a component. You've got user contributed website. Well, it may not be under your control. You may need some time to go back and fix it. So defendants, therefore, need to show that even if a technical violation exists, even if they have 3 or 4 Work Act violations, such a violation is not a barrier to access and does not really impact the overall usability of the website by persons with disabilities. And also take swift, definitive action to guarantee ongoing accessibility. That's what it's about. And call in experienced counsel and experts in the field of accessibility. Because you don't have to invent this over and over. I mean, you don't have to invent this. It's been done. Use the expertise that is available to you. I'm going to pause. I think we're going to actually do questions in the end, right? Okay. But I thought this was a very important topic to cover. Many of you had questions about it. Let's shift. Let's talk about users and the trends in technology that we are seeing. Well, I found this a really funny thing. Images, videos, multimedia, the way that we're exchanging and communicating with each other is really changing. When Twitter was first introduced, it was very text-based communication, I think 140 some characters. Now, 50% of Twitter impressions are images, video, or media, not text. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and people are beginning to communicate more and more via images. Instagram, for example, has 1 billion users, 1 billion users. And on Instagram, there was this little campaign that was started, which is an image of an egg. And it says, let's set a world record together and get the most liked post on Instagram, beating the current world record held by Kylie Jenner, 18 million. We got this. So an image of an egg. What this means to accessibility is really that people need to think about making sure that image content has alternative descriptions. And, there's a lot being done in the field of machine learning to make this easier, more automated. But this is a growing trend that has a significant impact on people with disabilities because, images do, and multimedia video needs captioning. Images need alternative descriptions. Another growing trend is interactive gaming. You're talking about real-time interaction, playing these games. You've got text messages, you're watching, you're playing, and it's like amazing the number of users that I see on gaming sites. For example, this game called Fortnite had 250 million users, has 250 million users. A lot of people play games, right? And I was looking at the interface of the Twitch TV, and there's a lot going on. So from the perspective of accessibility, there's a lot that you need to take care of. But here's the thing. When we are talking about making it accessible, whether it is the list of users on the left-hand side, or the chat going on the right-hand side, or the actual gaming itself with the controls and the interaction, whether you're watching or you're actually playing, all of this can be made accessible. It does seem like a little overwhelming. Well, the UI itself is a little overwhelming. But I also found gamers who are blind who are actually giving ratings. Can I play that? And they're giving ratings on the accessibility of the applications. I find that to be a growing trend. And it's important, right? I mean, because we want to be able to give full and equal enjoyment. The other growing trend is that, online marketplaces and payments are becoming a fact of life. In the US, I know I use Venmo when my kids run out of money, then they need it. They're like, okay, that's the easiest way. I pull up my phone and within minutes, I've sent over the money. So it's really important that as we look at money moving online, payments, the banking industry has been dealing with that for a long time. You've got uh, uh, all kinds of things. But I also noticed that really when you're looking at this marketplaces and payment, it's global. It really, you have to keep in mind. So you have Mercado Libre. It's the eBay of Latin America, essentially. And I did a quick Axe automated check on the website, and I found 92 issues. So the other piece of this is that in many countries, people don't have bank accounts. And this marketplace is actually helping people who have no bank accounts get into the financial system. It really is a big thing. You're talking about the marginalized being able to participate. And so it's really important we see this trend and we make it and keep it accessible. The fourth trend that I saw was, boy, what can't you get delivered? It's amazing. Fulfillment and delivery is like, wow, everything. Pharmacy, in this case of Rappi, which is again Latin American, the founder, one of the co-founders said, we thought, what if we digitize this ecosystem of this chaotic Latin American delivery culture? It's great, but cities are chaotic, delivery is manual, not all stores offer it. There's so much inefficiency and the cost is very high to get a delivery. What if we revolutionize this and start to deliver anything in under 30 minutes for less than $1? Quite a big, hairy, audacious goal, but it's happening. You can order anything, whether it is baby goods like diapers, anything from a pharmacy, beer, cigarettes, groceries, anything is possible. I spent some time on it and I could not come up with a single thing that I could not order. So it's really amazing. And I think it's very important to keep in mind that as our, I used to say all of Maslow's hierarchy of needs can be met online, and that's true today, but it's getting even more critical. It's like, our infrastructures have moved online. So it's important to keep that in mind. And if you don't look at, if you don't consider accessibility, you can imagine all these trends, which is making mobile applications and websites even more important. Can you imagine what the users feel? They basically are being shut out. I was thinking about it. It's like digital apartheid. That's what it is. So inclusivity is really important, and we don't want our users to be feeling overwhelmed because we have put up barriers to their access. Here's the flip side of it. As I was looking at what are we doing to make things better, okay? What is the trend in the accessibility technology realm, I found that the reaction that you see from users is very much the same as the reaction you see from developers. Accessibility, another thing to do. But that's not because developers don't really care. Actually, developers, with a little bit of effort, if you told them with a little bit of effort, they can make things so much better for so many people. I guarantee all developers would embrace accessibility. So what were some of the strides that we made in order to make it easier for developers, several years ago, we made the decision of making our rule engine that DQ provides, Axe, core, open source. It was a big decision for DQ and the world, I think, because we wanted the community to stop debating whether this rule is right or that rule is right, or is this work act this and work act that. We said, forget it. Put a million eyeballs on it. And it's literally a million eyeballs. We are getting a million downloads of acts per week. And the purpose of doing this is really the strides in accessibility that developers can take advantage of is via automation. I got into accessibility 20 years ago, and the mantra from day one, I believed it in my heart, in my soul, that there was nothing except automation that could make accessibility a reality. And what is the total number of downloads for our open source rule engine Axe Core? It's 30 million, which is significant, right? So I think we are making strides. Other innovations, we are seeing, we released a beta program, Axe Beta or Axe Pro Beta. And what it does is, so okay, automation, we can debate the numbers. Does it help you get to, I don't know, 50%, 60%, 40%? It depends upon the site under test, right? But it can get you halfway there, let's say. But there's still other things to be done. And there are critical barriers that people with disabilities are going to face if you stop at just automation. So we thought long and hard, and the criteria we used is that we're going to make intelligent guided testing available to people with disability, for developers, that is going to take it a little bit further. Remember, I'm saying that 100% is not achievable, but there is some point where it'll be good enough for the users and good enough for the developers. So intelligent guided testing, which extends the automation, it's got to be simple. It's got to require no knowledge. That was the principle that we began with, and we are actively getting feedback from lots of users, and we really would like to continue to get the feedback because I think it can improve things for developers and users tremendously. Machine learning. We have a webinar in our week-long webinars that are coming up, or the few 3 days of webinars that are coming up, where we show how machine learning technology can be leveraged to further automation of testing. And machine learning had become such a buzzword. Everybody was talking about it. We were working hard at it. We didn't want to talk about it till we really had something to show. And now that I see it, I realized that, in your intelligent guided testing, which is still like a few steps a developer has to take, if you can take that and cut the number of simple questions that you're asking developers by 50%, wow, what a time saving that can be. So the other thing that we have really, the innovation that I think is very important for developers, and it's not just web, right? We've talked about how mobile technology, native mobile, is going to be very much, thing that is now considered to be something that you can be litigated, by plaintiffs' lawyers for. We released for Android and iOS new accessibility rules libraries, and Google has some great innovations there too. So I think it's really important as a community that we keep improving those rules. But I think it really helps native mobile developers to have rules to begin with, just like it helped web developers to have those Axe Core rules for HTML. Microsoft has also done some really fantastic things for the world of accessibility. The commitment is from the top down, and their accessibility insights tool, which gives actually coverage. If you're interested in 100% coverage, you can get that. And again, it's open source. It's based on Axe Core. You can trust the automation, and they've really pushed the envelope for developers as well. And we really ought to thank both Google and Microsoft for the great efforts, because DQ's efforts, we're really grateful to have the support of folks like Microsoft and Google. And then we also saw JSX Alley for React, which is fantastic as well because it helps you do some static checks. But the most important thing is getting people started up on this journey, making it easy for developers. And I think that's what all these innovations have been. So the users and developers can look like that with a cup of coffee, relaxed. It's not that difficult for users and it's not that difficult for developers. That I think is really an important goal to get to. So the survey. We do this every year. We look at top 5 sites in different industries. So FinServ websites, top 5 FinServ, okay? Well, it seemed like we had gone in the wrong direction. That means that the number of accessibility defects across, the sum of defects across these top 5 sites went up, okay? From 120 in 2019 to 131 in 2020. Going in the wrong direction. But then when you look a little deeper, and by the way, the methodology for all this survey is not a full comprehensive test, it's a quick 1-second axe test. And I ran it twice on every website just to make sure you're getting the right results, which you don't need to do, but I was being extra cautious. Here's the thing. Banks are actually paying a lot of attention. They were 3 out of the top 5 FinServ people surveyed that had less than 2 issues, axe issues on their homepage, which to me is amazing because a few years ago that was impossible. But, there are people who are thinking it's one and done. So there was one bank which was stagnant, no improvement from the previous year. And one was actually much worse. So outliers, right? But I think for the most part, I was very encouraged by seeing that many banks are at least doing the automation, And the average number of errors across these 5 FinServ sites last year was 13, and this year a little bit worse, 16, but again, the outlier was a major contributor to that. Airlines, they were slightly improved. In 2019, there were 122 defects across the 5 airlines I surveyed on the homepage. It went down a little bit to 120 in 2020. So marginal improvement. Again, an outlier with major degradation, okay? The average of axe issues on these websites, the 5 websites, was 13.3, slightly worse in 2020, 13.5, but again, contributable to the outlier. Top 5 retailers. This one was interesting. I was like, is there a decline? The top 5 retailers in 2019 had across aggregate 74 defects. In 2020, it was 103. So I said, what's going on? Then I started looking at the data, and Amazon was actually axe clean. Nowadays, when you do an axe run and you get the clean report, you get a little Om symbol, very cute. And then I ran it again, like I was saying, I was running it twice, and I would run it at 5-minute intervals, and it had 13 issues. Of course, I was tempted to run it the 3rd time, and I did. And although I only reported on the 2 runs that I did, and there were 10 issues the 3rd time. So what I realized is retailers, others, the dynamic content contributed by so many people means that you have to have buy-in, tooling, and training has to be widely deployed. But like to my point earlier, I don't think zero work at defects is an achievable goal because, Amazon illustrated the point. They have a committed accessibility team. They really care. They do a very good job. and they had 0 defects, then they had 13, then they had 10. So they were actively working it, but things will happen. In 2019, the average on the retail websites was 9. In 2020, it was 16, so significant decline. But again, this again is attributable to outliers. Most people are paying attention now. Healthcare websites, wow, this was a pretty interesting thing. The top 5 healthcare sites in the survey that I do every year, basically I saw a significant decline, from 200 some to 60 some aggregate issues. And I thought, what is going on? Well, in 4 of the 5 issues, there was a significant drop in the number of issues. In the 1 remaining site that had a slight increase, they were mostly color contrast issues, that they needed to get to, and some were misuse of ARIA. They were trying, but they did not understand accessibility. That's what I walked away with. And they had still some work to do in terms of working with the branding and the color contrast issues. In 2019, average number of issues in the healthcare websites was 43. In 2020, it was 13. Again, significant decrease. Media and entertainment, I didn't know what to think actually, because the sum of issues across the top 5 media and entertainment companies in 2019 was 434. In 2020, it was 220. Again, a significant decrease, right? Across the board, actually all 5. Disney and USA had the most significant improvements. They were paying attention, but they have a long way to go, okay? So the mean or the average of ACTS issues in 2019 was 86. Into 2020, it's 44. It's still very high. So there's a lot that needs to be done there, but smiley face for improvement. All right. So I usually look and make some predictions for the following year, but this year, because of everything that's happened with dominoes and mobile applications, I really wanted to think about the challenge ahead. It's going to be a challenging year. So, Nucleus Research, an independent research agency that we worked with, did a study. I think it's a really interesting study. Basically, 70% of websites are inaccessible today. The internet is unavailable. Mobile applications as well. There's a pervasive digital divide for blind persons accessing the internet, and a 6.9 billion missed market opportunity. You know how difficult it is? The cost of user acquisition is very high. The cost of keeping users is also high, but lower. Don't you want the most loyal $6.9 billion market added to your customer list? There's lots of work to be done in retail, FedGov, news sites, and many, many more, they said. Okay? But I think the other things that I really found interesting were that somebody who's trying to access a website, if 2 out of the 3 transactions is abandoned, what does that say about the usability of that website, right? If somebody who's blind is trying to attempt to buy online and they abandon 2 out of 3 times any transaction they're doing, firstly, you're losing the 6.9 billion market. Secondly, I propose that site cannot be very usable by anybody, because if you think about it, all of us have disabilities at some point, whether temporary disabilities, and then there are disabilities of just environmental impact, like ambient lighting. When I'm outside in the sun, I can't see the screen. So you're losing many more transactions than what the Nucleus research is indicating here. I think that's really significant, okay? there were critical accessibility blockers in 70% of the sites that were surveyed. And then there's a secondary impact, which is that when people cannot use your website, what are they going to do? They're going to call your service center. They're going to call the call center. Well, one service call per week on an average. And what is the cost of that? So I think the study is really interesting. It had in-depth interviews with 73 adults who are blind and have severe visual impairments. The result of that is what we're finding out is you're losing a lot of business. And that's why I call it digital apartheid, It's just, can't ignore it anymore. The QA vector research, actually, despite the great efforts, and we have lots of banks who are customers, a lot of FinServ customers, and they're really doing a fantastic job, in my opinion, compared to a few years ago. Well, compared to the 20 years ago when I started in accessibility, definitely. But most financial services digital offerings are still not accessible. QA Vector actually spoke in detail to 26 leaders within banks, insurance companies, fintech firms in general, and asset managers. And this was global, across the United States, United Kingdom, Netherlands, Singapore, and India. What they learned is that accessibility is an orphan. Nobody owns it, usually, okay? And it really isn't on the radar of executives and boards. It's something that needs to change. I mean, if you tell the board, we are engaging in digital apartheid, I think that would get their attention. Accessibility is also a very reactionary thing, afterthought rather than a forethought, because it's usually when you're in the emergency room, just operate on me, get me out of here. It's not your get well program. So I did think that was really interesting. So who owns accessibility in these financial institutions? That was also a real mix, okay? Firstly, 67% said nobody owned it, but the rest of them who did have some owner, it sat in UX, CX actually, customer experience, UX, user experience, or diversity, or legal and risk, or product. So 9% in customer experience, 7% in diversity, 5% in product, 12% in risk, and 67% said nobody owned it. So near-term objectives, what can we do? Let's define some measurable objectives for accessibility. Let's make sure we shift accessibility left and embed it so that it's not expensive and it's not disruptive and it's not time-consuming. And prioritize accessibility as a commercial government imperative. And then we've got many leaders in this space who've been doing it, So look to them. There are many people that you can emulate. Capital One, USAA, US Bank, BB&T, Ally Bank. I mean, all these financial institutions who've been at it for a long time and have done many great things. We learn a lot from them. They learn a lot from us. And I think it's wonderful how we're making progress. So with that, I'll open it up to questions, and you can connect with us in many different ways on Twitter, Deque Systems, Deque Labs, Deque Systems Inc., LinkedIn. So we look forward to hearing from you. And that is our wonderful Deque team.
Hey, Preety, great job on today's presentation. We have about 8 minutes here for questions, so I'm just going to shoot over a couple to you real quick to answer, okay? So the first one we have here is, are there recommended strategies to best advocate for accessibility in enterprise software when making the case to business people who may not fully grasp the value of accessibility?
Yes. Yes, there are. There are best practices, and we'd be happy to share, get in touch with us. And the more we can communicate, we actually have a user group of enterprise level companies that do nothing but exchange these best practices and ideas. So we've got a rich, rich set of people who are working on this, and yes, there are best practices.
Great. Another question here. Regarding the legal update, have any companies been sued who are actively trying to make their website accessible at the time of the lawsuit? If so, how did these lawsuits turn out?
Well, that was the whole point of Hooters, meaning, yes, they had settled, they were actively working on the first one, and they were sued for a second separate digital property. So yes, you can get sued. If you have been sued once, you can get sued again. You have to show progress. You know, you have to show that it's sustainable. It's not a one-off.
Okay, another question here. If having accessibility tools offered on our site in lieu of assistive technology is not considered proper, would using an accessibility overlay or widget be considered illegal, or how does that have legal ramifications in the end?
I think the Domino's case actually cleared that up very well. So having, I don't know what an overlay, what you mean by that, but supposing you have a little widget that has assistive technology, like a different way to read out the website, I think that is not considered okay. Just like call a phone number is not considered okay.
Okay, great. Another question here. On the legal topic, this person has heard people saying accessibility laws are novel and constantly changing, and/or accessibility guidelines are impossible to meet. They're pretty sure that WCAG has only been updated twice in the last 20 years. So do you know where are these statements coming from, and what do people think about this? And why do people think this, especially?
Yeah, because I mean, the unknown is always kind of scary. It's always, and you know what? It is impossible to do if they don't have the tools, if they don't have the knowledge, right? So I think it is about empathy, in my opinion, exists. You have to give people tools, you have to give them the knowledge in order to be able to do this and not fight it, right? What's the point of tens and thousands of dollars being spent to fight this if you can do it as cost effectively, right? And why, I mean, like I said, 100% compliance is not an achievable goal in my opinion, but you can really remove obstacles for people with disabilities easily and sustain it.
Great, thanks,
Did that
Preety.
answer your question? I hope
Yeah,
so.
I think so. So another question here, back to the legal topic. What happens when you have a process, not a one-off approach, and you get sued?
Well, I would ask why you got sued, meaning why, if you have a systematic process and you are paying attention. Okay, so process is great. You can have a process. It can be systematic, but is it followed by all? If it's not followed by all, you're going to have a problem. So it's a constant reinforcement, continuous learning, continuous, checking to make sure people are doing this, top of mind at all times. And then, of course, I also think there could be the thing that people were not looking at the mobile apps and third-party vendors who contributing content. So perhaps that's how you could get sued if you're not considering all different facets.
Great. I think we have time for one last question here. It's always asking, what is the state of educational websites when it comes to accessibility?
You know, I haven't done an EDU survey, but I should. So next year, maybe we'll add a new category in our trend analysis of EDUs. I think EDUs have been paying attention for a long, long time. But I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. We'll get that worked into next year's presentation.
Yes.
Another question here. People do say accessibility compromises the look and feel of a site. Is that true? If no, how would you respond to that?
You know, it's really interesting. I think we have fantastic usability advocates who actually advocate for accessibility. And this is one of the biggest myths in accessibility, that accessibility makes your website or mobile application ugly. I don't think so. I mean, I know so that it's not the case, right? And I think Amazon, it's functional. Is it beautiful? Does it have like a whole bunch of photographs that are fluttering around and what? No. But the point is that it's about making it easy for people to get in and get out. People have busy lives, and accessibility helps, does not hinder. And no, it doesn't make your website ugly.
Great, thank you, Preety. So we've come to the end of our time today, but I want to thank you for doing such a great job. A reminder to people that the recording and slides will be sent out to all registrants. Please join us for our next session on Agile Accessibility for Good, and we hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thanks, everybody.
Everybody, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.